Okay, hi, it's Frank Foley again with another one of my Stories of Our Lives interviews with amazingly generous people that just decide to talk to me about their life, which is very cool. And just, I'm really grateful about it. And I don't really know what this project is about, but it's developing into something. So I've got another fantastic person with me who's agreed to be generous with her time, and she's Jo Dodds. Hi, Jo.
Hi.
How you doing? You all right?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm apart from I was probably your most awkward guest already, faffing around with my new laptop.
Let's just say that we've had a little bit before we've started recording, where we've just been, both of us have been getting our new locations sorted out. So that's all part of the that's all part of the story as well. Okay, so I'm always really nervous when I do these things because there's always that thought that you're just going to completely freeze. So I usually start off with this question, and it's about how I'm interested in my relationships with the people that I talk to, and some of those relationships are really close because they're friends or family, and others of them are like us, where we kind of know each other or we know of each other, but we don't know each other, and that's really interesting. So I came to you, I think, probably through Kerry mentioning you and that you were awesome. And that's really interesting. And how, I always start off with this question because it's a really awkward one. I don't even know why. It's not even a good question. But like when you hear that someone said, you got to speak to Jo because she's pretty awesome. Do you recognize that in yourself? You know what I mean?
I was listening to one of your other interviews just before we came on, and you said that to the lady, and she just went, yes. And I was like, I don't know if I'll be able to say that. But I could push back actually and say that you were famous to me long before Kerry mentioned you.
Okay.
In fact, Judith Morgan always raves about how handsome you are. She always used to talk about handsome Frank, and I never knew who he was. And then you and Kerry did a video, because I've been friends with Kerry online for ages.
Okay.
And we've not met, but we are meeting soon. So
that's really funny.
We might have met randomly and not really sort of remembered.
Yeah.
But no, you did a video. Was it about a year ago where you were talking about how you fill up hot water bottles?
Oh my God, that video! There we are trying to be serious people running courses and things, and the one video that had more hits than anything was hot water bottle video.
Yeah, so I remember watching that and absolutely wetting myself laughing. It was so funny. And then I suddenly realised that you are handsome Frank. And you're married to Kerry, and I didn't know that. So then it all started into place.
Yeah, so, I've never lived the water bottle. To say that people think I'm slightly OCD now is an understatement after the hot water bottle gate.
I can't quite remember the discussion, but I think I was actually with you. So I think I have got a bit of that too. So don't worry. So yeah, so I successfully deflected that question as to.
Very good. I can see I've got my work cut out today. Okay, so this is all about stories of our lives, and this is just getting all of us, anybody, everybody, because we're all the same underneath. That's how I feel about it, and everybody's got an interesting story to tell if we're prepared to listen. So that's what I really believe. And I'm really interested to take you back and just to, we have a really short window of time to follow your story, but, let's make the most of it. So let's go right back. Let's rewind. Have you always been Jo Dodds?
I was Jo Wild for a long
Brilliant.
time.
I love that. So Jo Wild. So it's fascinating with women because obviously they have to give up their name, or they choose to give up their name, So take us back to young Jo Wild. What was Jo Wild like back then, Jo?
Well, it's interesting because I have a 12-year-old daughter, so I have a bit of a mini me, and she is very, very like me. So I'm looking at myself, however many years ago now, thinking, oh my goodness. But she's so different to me as well. She's got so much resilience and self-esteem and all that sort of stuff that I didn't have.
Wow.
So it's really interesting to look back and see that difference. But I was always quite mature for my age, and my sister was probably younger for her age. So we had a 3-year age gap, but it felt like a bigger one. I had a very, I'd say, quite privileged childhood. My dad had a business and we lived quite well when I was younger. We had a nice house in the country. And then it all went horribly wrong.
Wow. Okay. So,
Yeah,
before we get into that, let's just clarify. So just one sibling?
So again?
Just one sibling?
Oh, one sibling, yes, yeah, one sibling.
Okay,
yes,
yeah. And a 3-year age gap
mm-hmm.
between you two. Okay. So just to clarify, okay. So do you mind going here? Do you mind?
No, it's fine.
Okay, so can you take us through?
Yeah. So my dad's background. My dad was a bricklayer when he met my mum, and he got into the office and into computers at the building firm that he worked at. They lived up in Sheffield when I was born, and because of that, and it was like the late 60s, early 70s, he ended up moving, or we ended up moving all the way down to Portsmouth in Hampshire, because he started working for a computer company in the end, because he'd got that experience. So he went from being a bricklayer to a computer programmer. Wow. Okay. And then in the early 70s, or sort of early to mid 70s, set up his own computer business with a colleague. And they, I don't know loads about it because I was quite young at the time, but it was basically data processing. So they used to run payrolls using their system in the days when that was, still new. And he ended up jet setting all around the world. He had clients in South Africa and Israel and America, Australia, India, the Netherlands, whatever. And it was really different for his family, actually, because his family, my granddad was an engineer and my uncle was a mechanic, and both of them were really into camping. And so they both became lecturers at university so that they could have really long holidays and go camping all the time. So they'd be towing caravans around the country. And even now, my aunt and uncle in their 70s spend sort of March to October in a caravan, basically. Whereas my dad spent the whole time flying around the world, including going on Concorde on more than one occasion. And when my granddad was very, very ill, he was in Germany on his own on a walking holiday and had a really bad heart attack. My dad sort of flew over to rescue him, and my uncle now says there's no way I would have been able to do that because I'd never even left the country. He has now. He does go on holiday abroad now, but at the time he didn't. So in 1982, my dad had an article in the Daily Mail, and it had a picture of a brick in one hand and his brochure for his computer system in the other, and it was basically bricklayer made good sort of thing. And he was going to turn over £2 million in 1983. So it shows you the sort of size of the organisation at the time. And they set up a big computer deal with a big computer company. And then at the last minute, the computer company pulled out. And so my dad lost the business and we lost our family home. So I was 15. And we went from having 2/3 of an acre, 300-year-old house in the country to renting a property and having very little in the way of money. And my mum and dad, the reason I sort of told you a bit of the backstory, they'd always had a really volatile relationship, including him nearly moving to America because he had an affair, basically. My mum was quite she did a real genius move. I felt that when she found out he'd had the affair and was going to move to America to live with this woman, she befriended the woman. She got her a phone number, befriended her to the point where my dad never went. So, obviously it worked, in some ways for us, but I sort of, I obviously again don't really know the detail, but she obviously she did what I call turned into the skid and made it all right.
Brilliant way of putting it. I love that.
But they'd had this volatile relationship, and then the business failing, my dad got lots of panic attacks and clearly was dealing with things through that sort of way. Mm-hmm. My mum was just lost it completely, basically, and was a very volatile sort of person. And they had, on and off, obviously fallen out over the years, but the company going just was, too much for them. And it ended up with her bullying me because I'm very like my dad, and my sister was very like my mum, always very like my mum. And so my mum used to take a lot of the stuff out on me, but she also had an attitude of, if I'm going to be upset and live through all this, you're going to do that too, sort of thing. Whereas I'm very stiff upper lip. I'm not going to tell you if I'm hurt or upset.
Yeah.
So we'd have, lots of conversations where she'd be trying to sort of get me to wallow in her upset with her, and I'd be doing the opposite on purpose, which obviously didn't sort of work for her either. So anyway, the upshot of it all was I moved in with my friend's family for 6 months when I was 15 because it was just getting too bad at home.
Is this still in Portsmouth?
No, by this time we'd moved. So we lived in Hampshire till I was 8, and then we moved to Dorset when I was 8, and that's where we lost the house, and then we lived just near the New Forest, basically. Okay. So yeah, I moved in with my friend's family for 6 months because they knew that things were really tough, and then my dad found a house, and then we moved out, my sister, my dad and myself, went and lived away from my mum. But she really lost it. I mean, she died 6 years ago, and we'd had a much better relationship in more recent years. She was a great nanny to Ellie. Yeah. And I know that it was really difficult for her, and I know she couldn't cope with it. And I think if she'd been still married to a bricklayer, living a normal sort of life, it would have been probably a lot better for her. But she'd loved the high life of jet setting around the world and, having money and all that sort of stuff. And then she couldn't cope when it went the other way, and neither could my dad, but they certainly couldn't cope together with that.
So do you mind? Because, it's fascinating. So in the time when your dad had got to that, he was building on the up, and he was traveling a lot.
Yeah.
What age are you around about?
Probably 9, 10, 11, 12, I suppose. Okay. Which is well, no, I was 14 actually in 1982, wasn't I? So yeah, it's probably 10 to 14, so that sort of age.
Okay. So when he was away, where were you?
At home with mum.
So mum stayed
until that all happened. So I was 15 when that. Yeah. So she used to sometimes go away with him, and my grandparents would come and stay. One year they went away on holiday actually for 2 weeks, and we just stayed with some of their friends randomly who didn't have children, and they just come and stayed with us for 2 weeks, which was brilliant fun because they didn't have children, so they were great at doing exciting things.
Right. Yeah.
So that was good. So my mum did go away quite a lot, and my grandparents would come and stay. That was my dad's parents. And sometimes my mum's mum would come and stay as well. So I don't really remember any of that really. I just, it was good, fine, it wasn't a problem and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. But it got difficult. So when they were going through all the trauma and we were still living in our family home, it got really difficult. So I remember I was 15. I had a boyfriend who lived, 5 or 6 miles away, and I remember ended up going round to his house one day because my dad he'd gone up north, so he was supposed to be away for like 24 hours, and within 15 minutes of him leaving the house, she'd just started on me, and I ended up walking out and going to a friend's house, and then when I came back, she started again, but then she started doing things like unplugging the phone so I couldn't phone anyone, and locking the house so I couldn't get out, and so in the end I did end up phoning my boyfriend and saying I was going around there, and then she drove behind me as I walked and refused to get in the car for 5 miles to get to his house, begging me to come home. And I called my dad and said that I wasn't going home till he came back, so he just turned around and came sort of straight back again. But then he went away after that, and I told him that if she started again, I was going to go and stay at my boyfriend's house, so I did. And I lived there for the week whilst he was away. So it'd been difficult beforehand, but then it got, quite a lot more difficult after that. And after we moved out, we didn't tell her where we lived for however long, but she found out. And I remember being in the sitting room one day on the phone to my friend, and my mum appeared in the garden, and I was like, oh my God, my mum's just got here. She obviously knows where we live now. And then I heard this rattling in the kitchen. I looked, and my mum got her hand through the letterbox, trying to unlock the door. I mean, I don't know what she would have done if she'd got in, but I was like, I've got to go. So I sort of put the phone down, and then got the key. And then her mum came with her, and they picked me up, and we drove off and drove around for 2 hours until my dad came home because we were too frightened to go home. Wow. So in the end, my dad went to court and got an injunction out to stop my mum coming to the house. So it was. I think he said something like there were 18 battered wives in court that day, and he was the only battered husband. And there'd been things like when I wasn't there, she started to take things out on my sister, and my dad would call the police because he wasn't going to retaliate if she hit him. He wouldn't hit her back, but she needed to calm down. So we called the police to her about 3 times, I think. So there was lots of evidence to enable them to get the injunction. So so that all happened. So
Wow.
I was doing my O levels then. So we just finished O levels, I think, when we moved away from her. And then I met who became my first husband, but I was only 17. He was 23. And when I was 18, I ended up moving in with him because I left school. I basically didn't work hard enough to pass my A levels. All my cohort went off to university, which is what I always imagined I would do. Yeah. But I basically didn't. And it will have been a combination of, I'd met Steve. It was difficult at home, and I'm a procrastinator and I hate writing essays and all that sort of stuff. And you can't get through your A-levels just by having a good memory and paying attention in class. Although, to be fair, I did pass my A-level English and I hadn't read any of the books. So I thought that was pretty good.
That's really good. You'd have been brilliant at uni.
Yeah, so I went to work in retail and I ended up working, because we lived in the country, I worked about 45 minutes from home. And we, at one stage, only had one car between myself and my boyfriend, and he worked shifts as well. So in the end, we spent so much time waiting at his sister's house for the other person to finish work that we decided that it would be better to live closer to work. So we got a flat. So I actually moved in with him when I was 18, and then we got engaged. And my dad wasn't keen on the whole thing. He was very upset about it. In fact, at one stage, we had a big row and he stopped talking to me and told me I had to take my car back. And said if I didn't take it back, he'd call the police, tell them I'd stolen it, which was not like my dad at all. So he was obviously, I remember one of my managers at the time saying, you need to understand, you've gone through all of this and now he's just lost you because you've just moved out. And he's obviously really upset, and that's not his way of being. He can't do upset very well,
Good manager.
Yeah, and then he went away on business. My grandparents came down, and whilst they were there, I crashed the car. So then I was traumatised. I didn't really crash it. I just slightly drove it into somebody's little door, so it was a bit squashed on the corner. And I was really worried that he was going to go loopy, but my grandpa just sorted it all out, and it was all fine. And then we were talking again, so it was all fine. But
let me stop you for a minute, Jo, because I've got so many questions. But I'm just interested just to pick a little bit.
Yeah.
So as a younger child, were you aware that you had, was it just your parents, or was it were you kind of more with your dad, or, in terms of sometimes kids gravitate towards one parent.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have that sense?
My dad wasn't interested in children really until they were old enough to have a sensible conversation. Okay. And he used to sort of openly admit that when I was older, and we'd have that conversation about it. My mum was great. I mean, everyone loved my mum. I was laughing about her that I could always invite anyone round for dinner at any time at the drop of a hat, because my mum was not a very good cook. So we used to have a lot of fish fingers, chips and peas. So whereas other people would have had to have planned it ahead to get the right ingredients for their proper cooked meal, my mum just chucked a few more frozen chips in the fryer and all was well. So there was always that open house thing. Which was really good, and we got on fine. Yeah. But she was emotional, and when there were issues, it wasn't nice, arguments and things. Sure. But then, I remember, I used to get away with everything. I remember there's one story where we had a big row. So I would probably have been about 10, and she told me I wasn't having any lunch, I wasn't going to the disco tonight, the school disco, and I wasn't going on the school skiing trip. And I just, in my typical logical brain, thought to myself, well, she's not going to starve me. She's not going to stop me going to the disco, because she never follows through on any of her threats. And they've paid for the ski trips. They're not going to not let me go to that, are they? Because that's, a big thing. What I didn't factor in was that she was going to tell my dad that this had happened. So I did get my lunch, but when I got home that afternoon, I wasn't allowed to go back out to the disco because my dad stepped in and made her follow through on her threat. But of course I did go on the ski holiday. But I did run rings around her a bit with that sort of stuff.
And
just like my daughter.
who would you say you would like? Do you
absolutely like my dad?
Really?
Yeah, I've got the sort of, when I'm being outgoing, the friendliness and the generosity of my mum. Yeah. But in terms of sort of logic and outlook on life, much more my dad than my mum.
Wow.
which is what made it difficult. So when mum and dad were falling out and he wasn't there, then I was the next person to have a go at. And I think, you know, when I left, my sister got it because she was the only one left. And before that, she hadn't had any issue with my mum really. But by that time, she was a bit older, and obviously there was no one else. So she, you know, she then had all the sort of emotional outbursts instead, and sort of thing.
How was your sister's relationship with your parents? You know, is your sister more like your mum, or is she more like?
She's very like my mum, but as I say, she you know, she was really close to my mum until it all went wrong, and then my mum ended up, you know, taking stuff out on her as well, and then that you know, caused them an issue.
So were you estranged? Were you just not in contact then for, you know, for in like what would that be, the late 80s to the
late 80s? Yeah. So well, I am too nice, so if my mum used to phone up, I used to speak to her, so I'd have hours and hours and hours of her slagging my dad off and telling me how terrible life was and everything else. Whereas my dad and my sister would just put the phone down on her because they just wouldn't put up with it. So I did end up having lots of those conversations. I worked for Safeway. I was personnel manager when I was 19. So I was there for about a year before I got that role as a stock control, inventory control manager. And my mum used to phone up all the time there. And a bit later on as well, when I lived on my own and didn't have a phone, she'd phone there. And my head cashier used to tell her I was in a meeting because she'd recognise her voice and she'd know that I didn't want to speak to her. Wow. So she'd make excuses for me. But she was lonely. She was lonely and wanted to talk to people and stuff. But I remember I'm jumping ahead, but I was living with a boyfriend's family because they had a big house that had lots of flats, and I lived in their flat, and I went out with their son for a little while, and I'd been there at Christmas, and they said, do you want to phone your mum, you know, feel free. And I did it reverse charges because, you know, in those days that's what you did. And then months later I wasn't going out with him anymore but still lived there, and they called me one day to say my mum was on the phone and she'd got the phone records and, or, you know, the bill, and because it was reverse charges she knew the number, and she'd just randomly called it and asked to speak to me, and they were like, no, it's fine, she can call anytime. I was like, no, she can't. And then my sister didn't tell her the number for years where she was living, and my mum phoned me one Christmas and said, well, I've just spoken to Kay. And I was like, really? And I'm thinking, how would that have happened? I'm sure Kay hasn't called you. And then I found out she'd ordered a phone book for the town that my city that my sister lived in, and had gone literally through line by line, found her address and got the number because she was lodging with someone who did have a phone, but she told her there was no phone. And yeah, so I mean, she had nothing better to do, so I suppose that's, you know, it's ingenious if nothing else.
So taking everything, that's fascinating. It's just like a snapshot, you know, into someone's past, and, you know, everything that meant into, because what I'm fascinated by is who you are. And like,
we haven't heard the big bit yet.
Carry on. I'll shut up. Carry on.
So I moved in with my boyfriend, got engaged, as I said. I was 19 and my dad died.
Oh my God.
So I
did not see that coming. Oh,
no.
My God.
So my mum that's 30 years ago this Christmas. He died on the 21st of December. So my boyfriend and I actually had decided we were going to move back in with him because, you know, it was something we wanted to do and stuff, whatever. And he died, and we stayed where we were in our flat, and my sister went to Scotland and moved in with my aunt and uncle for a couple of years because she was only 16. I was only 19. She was only 16. And I'm so grateful that they...
Sorry.
He was 48. 48. So he died of cirrhosis of the liver, and he'd always been a heavy drinker, but he was very much work hard, play hard. So if he was working hard, he wasn't drinking. But after it all went horribly wrong, he just drank a lot. And then he told me that he had hepatitis C, and that he wasn't supposed to drink. So then he was drinking shandy, which of course is still alcohol. But he wasn't. He was also drinking vodka, which was his sort of drink at the time. And I think he owed the Midland Bank £180,000. That was in 1988. Personally, they used to send detectives around every so often to make sure we weren't living the life of Riley. He had a couple of customers still, from his computer business that he would support, so he'd still go and help them if the computer system went down and stuff. So he had maintenance from them, which I don't know the details, but it would have been, you know, a few £1,000s a year, I guess. So that was what he was sort of living on. He tried contracting in London a couple of times, but he just would get to the stage where he'd tell them to, you know, get lost, and then he'd stop because he just couldn't work for anyone else anymore. Don't know where I get that from. And I just think, I look at it now, you know, the day after he died, the Inland Revenue man knocked on the front door. And so I took great glee in telling him he'd just died, because I knew my dad would have thought that was quite funny that he didn't now have to pay it. But I don't know where he would have gone if he hadn't have died, you know, how it would have panned out for him, because I just, you know, I mean, looking at it now, I'm a year and a half older than him now when he died, and I think, you know, if I was in that situation, what would I do? And I probably have a more positive view than he did, but only because I'm not in that situation. I mean, sure. You know, it's a lot to get away from, and you know, he was lonely, and there were lots of other issues ongoing with my mum still after he died. And I just think it was just too hard, really. So drinking was easier, and when he knew he was going to die, it was, you know, just the next natural thing.
Okay.
So,
I mean, you know, everybody watching, let's just settle with that for a second. I mean, goodness gracious. But what I'm interested in, Joe, is, like, I don't want to say the word that came was underneath all that, but it's not underneath, because it's not a story, it's your life that you're living all through that.
Mm-hmm.
But the person that you're developing into 11, 12, 13, 17, 18, your dad, your mom, the business, the person that's coming out of that, that's developing from that, your outlook and your ethic, if you like, what is that? Can you see? I'm interested in the lines that come from there. From the person sitting here now. What was developing out of you? Was it a resilience? Was it a kind of fatalism? What do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you know, I know exactly what you mean, and I've identified a lot of it over the years.
Wow.
My dad had a mantra that he drilled into me, which was, you only get out of life what you put into it. So that was there all along. Him and I were really close before he died.
Yeah.
Really close. We got on really well. And that's one of my, you know, big sort of regrets about the whole thing, was that, you know, given I now have a business and, you know, I understand a lot more about the business world, I was too young really to know a lot of what was going on in his world.
Yeah.
And also it was, you know, it wasn't that relevant. And also it was just too difficult, I guess, when the business was, you know, going under and everything else. So I've got that. It created resilience, but also, I was going to say something make you laugh. It probably won't make you laugh, but it sort of makes me laugh. He died on the 21st of December. I went back to work on the 22nd of December, which is, it's not, it wasn't because I was a workaholic, although I did lots of extra hours, because I had quite well, when they replaced me in that job, they replaced me with 2 people. So I had quite a lot of work to do. But my bigger thing was, if I don't go to work, what am I going to do? I'm going to sit at home on my own, moping around about the fact that Dad's died, and nothing's going to change. So I might as well go and, you know, fill my time with something more useful.
Sure.
The really ironic thing was that my friends who I worked with had a whip round and bought me some flowers, and somebody had asked one of my friends what I drank, so they bought me a bottle of vodka. Which, well, again, my dad would have laughed heartily at the irony of that. But that was their to make me feel better. Which to some people would have been the opposite, but actually it just made me laugh. So there was that, the resilience piece, definitely. I realised that, and I didn't cry either, which was really weird. But for the next 2 or 3 years, every time I cried about anything else, so whether it be a sad film, an argument with somebody, or whatever, then I lost it for like 6 hours. I was, you know, a sort of gibbering mess sort of thing. Yeah. So I knew that I'd built this, like, and I could talk about it all along. And I mean, I think death is something you should talk about a lot anyway now, because of situations that we've had in our family. My father-in-law died a couple of years ago, and you know, the way that we dealt with it with my daughter and everything else, they live next door, so we lived right the way through it. We looked after him at home and stuff. I think it's really important you talk about death, but at the time I didn't have a problem with talking about it, other than for other people. And I often say, anyone who's, you know, had that situation and is happy to talk about it, that you have that horrible moment where you see someone, you talk to them. It even happens now, you know, 30 years later, but people will go, so, you know, where'd your parents live? And I just think, oh God, not because I have a problem with it, but I know they will, because, you know, they'll say, where does your dad live? And I'll go, oh, he died. I'm so sorry. And you could see the panic in their eyes, like, oh my God, I've just brought it up. Right. And, you know, I have to sort of overly go, no, it was like 30 years ago. It's not a problem. Yeah. But it wasn't even a problem at the time, because it's just the fact, you know, of the situation, sort of thing.
Right.
But because I was able to build that sort of, that facade, I suppose. So I did keep that facade thing going on for quite a long time, which I didn't used to acknowledge, I suppose, which I've become more aware of now. The other thing I didn't realise for a long time was that my need for security, because I hadn't had any. So from when I was 15 and lost the house, right the way through till I was 19, and I had nobody to. So my dad died with no money, obviously. I didn't have any inheritance or anything. And my mum didn't have any money. She was unemployed, lived in her mum's council house. My grandparents were still alive, so they'd occasionally give me a couple of £100 or whatever, just to sort of keep me going. But what I earned is the money that I had. And I said that I lived in the flat of somebody who I went out with their son, and then I didn't in the end, and they were brilliant with me. They put the rents up for everyone and didn't put mine up because they knew that I couldn't afford it and things like that. So it was really quite touch and go, you know, for a long time. And I used to have nightmares about our house, which is really weird. So this house was in the country, in the middle of nowhere, pitch black, and my mum and dad quite often would go out to the pub at night and leave us on our own, you know, at a much younger age than we do with our own children now. And I've had many a nightmare of thinking somebody's going to break into the house, and sort of running from the front of the house where I've just put the lock onto the back of the house, where we had this. It was one of those, like, just wooden plank doors, you know, with bits across, and one of those latches, and the key was just literally like a nail stuck in a hole, which would stop the latch coming up. That was the lock on the back door. I mean, it's just rubbish, isn't it? And I have nightmares of me running in, trying to get the thing in the hole so that the burglars can't get in, and all this sort of stuff. And interesting, when I met my current husband, who's my second husband, 16 years ago, and moved into this house, so I've lived here the longest I've ever lived in my whole life, all those nightmares went away. I never have nightmares about that house anymore. And and it wasn't about being frightened of the house. It was obviously something to do with lack of security to do with that house. Yeah. Sort of thing. I don't know entirely. So the security thing was a big thing. And, you know, I didn't go to university, as I said, which I now realise was a really good thing anyway, because I think what would have happened, especially with my dad having died, is I'd probably have got a job part-time, which would have extrapolated into more than part-time and into a career, and I would have probably just flunked out of university anyway. So actually choosing not to go, because as I said, you know, I was 19 and a personnel manager. By the time all my friends left university, I was earning more money than them, and I had 4 years management experience. So I think, you know, in the end it all worked out well, but at the time it was just circumstance really that you know, stopped.
And that management experience that you had at an early age, did that then, you know, in the ensuing years, say the 10 years between, you know, 19 and 30, 34, you would have met your husband?
Yeah.
So in that kind of period, what was work life? Was that developing into, and then, so that's, what is that? That's 15 years, and then 16 years from then. So it's kind of like, you know.
Yeah. My job, my career was everything. But in the meantime, remember, I had got that boyfriend from when I was 17 that I was engaged to and I split up with. But then I did get back together with him when I was 21, and I got married to him when I was 26, and then we split up when I was 28. So that's another learning point, which I think was he was the link to my dad. He knew my dad really well, and they were really close. And I think because I hadn't met anyone else in the meantime, and I was lonely and I was on my own, and then him and I got back together again, I think that was the sort of anchor back to, you know, the past, if you like. And he had his own issues, and his family, you know, there was lots of stuff. to the point where I'm in touch with them now and he isn't. So it was complicated.
Life is fascinating. Wow.
Exactly. So I had all of that, but I basically, I worked in retail. I'd had regional and national roles, and I travelled a lot and I moved around a lot. So I lived during that time, I moved, as I said, to the flats where I ended up going up with her son for a while. That was Bournemouth. I then lived in Bristol, Slough, Knutsford, Ealing, and then eventually back down to Hamble, which is where I was living when I met Simon. So it was all about work, basically, and lots of traveling.
You said something earlier on about, I didn't maybe quite, I should have written it down, but you said something about being employed.
Not being employable anymore, you mean?
Yes.
Like I said about Dad, yes.
Where do I get that from, or something?
Yeah. So I started my business in 2005.
You were employed for quite a long time.
Yes.
And then you grew out of that, or? Mm-hmm. Okay.
No, I didn't grow out of it. I had security to enable me to take the chance to do something different. So it was after I met my husband, but also because I wanted to have my daughter. So I was an HR director and was commuting to London, and I wanted to have a baby, and I didn't want to commute to London, and I wanted to ideally work from home. So I read an article in a magazine about a lady who was selling instructions on how to set up local magazines. So I sent off for the pack and started a magazine business, like you do. Oh my God. I did the best negotiation of my life. How long have you got? I tell you. So the bits I've missed out. So I worked in all these organisations and got promoted and everything else. And then just after I met my husband, I'd worked for B&Q originally with a consultancy, and then directly for them as HR manager for, ironically, their I was working for Kingfisher for the first transactional website project for B&Q. So until 2000, you couldn't buy anything online from B&Q.
Right. Okay.
And so I was the HR manager for that project, and got on really well. I left the consultancy. They wanted me to work for them direct, so I did. And then the project was coming to a close, and I went off to do a startup. That didn't work because they ran out of money, basically. And so I came back to B&Q and ended up in a regional role because I wanted to, build a career with them.
Yeah.
Had the worst boss ever. This woman who, oh my God, she was just awful. She used to talk over me in meetings purposely, like to the point where all my colleagues would be like, oh my God, did she really just do that? And I'd be like, yeah, I went to a meeting once, and she phoned me up on the way and told me that all this stuff had changed and nobody knew. So when I got there, I had to explain this, and this. So she briefed me, and I did all the explanation, and it turns out it was a complete stitch up. So I looked like I was being a troublemaker, and actually it was her that fed me all this information.
Oh my God.
And I know, it was just awful. And basically after 4 months, they paid me off, compromise agreement, and it was, I can't remember, they paid me way more than they needed to, basically, so that they could compromise it, and I'd then obviously not be able to say anything to anybody. So I just basically disappeared. She then left 4 months after me, and I found out afterwards that they'd been trying to get her to leave for 2 years. So I basically felt completely let down that I'd had such a great reputation with the organisation, moved into a different part, and then had all this happen. So I vowed I was going to go and do interim, and I wasn't ever going to go and work permanently anywhere ever again. Right. So I did. I worked for JD Wetherspoon. I worked for First Choice Retail.
Yeah.
And then I ended up working for Benji's, the sandwich shops in London.
Okay, yeah.
And they wanted me to go permanent, and I didn't want to go permanent. I was just literally getting married when I went to work for them. And I said, I want to have a baby. I'm not going to be here for very long. But because they wanted to do an IPO, they wanted a stable management structure. They said, well, we won't be around for that long either. So,
just do it.
Just do it. And so then I thought, I'd get maternity leave then, wouldn't I? So I went permanent. And that's when I changed my name. So when I got married the first time, I didn't change my name. My husband changed his name to Wild.
Wow, awesome.
So I became Jo Dodds. And then I found out about this business opportunity, as I said. And I went to my boss and I basically said to him, if I you know, I want to start a business, you know, I want to have a baby and leave. So I could reduce my hours to 3 days a week. And in the money that we save, we can use to get a new full-time administrator so that we provide a better service in my team. And then in the 2 days a week, I can start my own business. And he agreed.
Wow.
So that's how I started my business. And I had 8 magazines at one stage all around this area. God knows how I did it. I can't even, I mean, I did pull a few all-nighters, but it was a nightmare. But yeah, thanks, Dad, for that work ethic.
Wow, that's amazing. That is amazing how it follows right the way through. And since then, so your mid-30s until now, that's the same business, or
no?
Oh, so now, so finish.
Seriously, you're not going to be surprised, are you? Yeah, okay,
yeah. Up to date.
So I had the magazine business, and I basically didn't sell advertising. I networked and provided a great result. So that's how I grew the business, because I couldn't sell the advertising. In fact, I was telling someone the other day, somebody once phoned me to place an ad, and when I tried to call him back, his gatekeeper wouldn't let me speak to him. And I kept saying, he's left a message, he wants to place an ad. That's what the message said. And she was like, yeah, they all say that though. And I was like, no, but really, truly, he did. Go and ask him. And I just thought, I'm never going to do cold calling, because, you know, it's just not. So I was doing that. In the meantime, I read a book on how to set up WordPress websites, and I set mine up. And then I decided to teach businesses how to do that in the days when businesses still weren't really sure they needed a website anyway. So that was like 2008.
Right.
Then social media came along. So I started using that, and then decided to specialise in social media. Again, when people, I remember going to B&I meetings and people had no idea what I was talking about. Didn't think it was going to catch on, that sort of thing. And then in 2012, and by then I'd shut a few magazines and I sold basically all the others. So I sold about 4 magazines, and 2 of them are still running. And then I went to, randomly, a meeting in London with an organisation called Engage for Success. Because I knew that social and digital tools were going to be really key in organisations for collaboration and communication. And with my HR background and my social media background, I thought it was a great sort of opportunity. And also you can, you know, get paid more per day in a corporate environment than you are normally when you're doing other stuff with small business owners. And Engage for Success wanted me to help them do the go live for their website and their social media. And then I ended up working for them on a regular basis for the last 6 years. I've done a day a week for them, sort of in the background. I do lots of the sort of technical stuff as well as speaking on employee engagement, and now specialising in it. So I specialise in employee engagement and productivity now. So nothing like I did before.
It's fascinating.
My own.
your history is so fascinating though, because it's like, I'm a great believer that humans are really like, you know, there's a lot of kind of like, you know, we're destroying the planet, humans are terrible and all that kind of stuff. But I'm fascinated by us. Mm-hmm. And I think we're incredibly tenacious, and, you know, we you know, they reckon that there were probably about 20,000 humans at one point about 100,000 years ago, you know, and we survived. Mm-hmm. We come from those people, you know, on the east coast of Africa somewhere, you know, and I'm going somewhere with this, sorry. Listening to your history, it strikes me as I sit here, it's fascinating that you're a person that has that confident tenacity to go into an area that you don't really know anything about and go, right, I've got it, now I'm going to teach other people. And that amazes me. That kind of, you know, how many times have you said, you know, I went into this thing and then I was teaching it. You know, I went into this thing and I set this up, and that amazes me. Do you get that about yourself, that you have this skill to adapt really quickly, and then the confidence to then say, I know how to do it?
Only more recently have I realised that. And in fact, it was interesting the other day, somebody, I think it was Judith actually, on one of her threads said, what did they say on your school report? And my school report said, if I spent as much time working as I did talking, then I'd be brilliant. And I said, you know, of course, I'm a speaker and a trainer now, so, you know, that wasn't ever a problem, but it felt like it was at the time, I suppose. But it's funny, there's a wonderful lady who you should get on here, and whose name I've just suddenly forgotten. Her business name is Somebody Inside. Danielle McLeod, that's it. And she wrote an email this morning about how people have always thought, so going back to your very first question,
right.
People always think that she's got it, that it's there, she's confident, it's fine. And she said she's done so many things where she's absolutely been bricking it behind the scenes and been trying to give that impression to people, but they get the complete opposite impression. Yeah. And she was saying, all these things, I wake up every morning worrying about this, worrying about that, blah, blah, blah. And that is not how she appears. And she's right, she doesn't appear like that. Yeah, exactly. And I think I'm the same. I always used to say that, and I still say that I'm not confident at all, but I just pretend I am. I know. And yet I hear when people talk about, public speaking, and they say, all the things you need to do to calm down beforehand, blah, 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 blah. Well, you put me in front of 500 people and I'll just speak to them. I don't even need to prepare anything. I'll just say something. I don't know what it will be, but, tell me what you want me to talk about. And I'm only realising now that, that we have to understand what our strengths are and sort of grow into them, if you like, and worry less about the things that we don't feel so confident about. So, I can do that, but I never feel like I'm prepared enough to go and talk to people.
Right.
I hate doing video. I've got a friend who keeps saying, you need to do video, you need to do live video, and I hate being on video. So thanks, Frank.
Thank you for doing this.
But the reason I hate video is not for what people might imagine. It's the fact that I like to be able to see the person I'm talking to. So the reason I can stand in front of 500 people and talk to them without being worried is I can see their eyes. And if what I'm saying isn't resonating with them, and I hate that word, I can't believe I just used it. But if it's not landing with them, I can change what I'm going to say next because I can see. But on a webinar or on a monologue podcast, I can't see who I'm talking to, and it doesn't work for me on that basis. So. But I never realised that for a long time. And I keep, there's loads of videos on YouTube of me saying, right, I'm going to start doing videos. Right, I'm going to start doing, what was that thing? Not Blab, the big Periscope. I'm going to start doing Periscope. And I did a few of those because I just thought I had to. But as you know, Judith Morgan says, sell as you buy. And I hate watching videos, so I don't make them either.
Okay. Wow. Go on, Karen.
Well, I think I keep sort of saying, at nearly 50, I do just wish we could learn all these things so much younger. How can we teach our children all this wisdom that we eventually learn through osmosis?
We were having this exact conversation a couple of days ago. Kerry and I were talking about, the kind of psychology of experience, really, I suppose, to kind of boil it down. And I think it's probably, I can imagine thousands of years ago, people having similar conversations, and they will in the future. And it's just, you experience is what it is. It's time and failure again and again, and then learning. And, and it's like, okay, I just, the only reason I know not to do that is I've done it 10 times and I screwed it up. Mm-hmm. And that's it.
And yet
you can't really buy that, can you?
No, and yet the millennials, when people are being critical, they're terrible. But when people are talking about characteristics of the new generations, it's about wanting more purpose in what they do and more meaning in what they do. Right. And actually, one of my big learnings, which is partly why I do the Power to Live More stuff, which is about the productivity and well-being piece, is in the last 6 years, as I said, my mum died within 5 days of finding out she had lung cancer. She was dead. My father-in-law had cancer for 4 years, and he died. My mum's partner died 6 months after her, as much as anything else, through being lonely, I think. Through all of that, I started to really think about, what's important, what do I want to do, what don't I want to do, how do I align my life with all the things I want to do. So it took all of that for me to stop working like a lunatic and start really appreciating being in the moment and all the sort of mindfulness stuff that everyone talks about. Well, I think the millennials actually have, because of their circumstances and the things they're not going to have, and the way that things are, they've got some of that stuff already. So whilst we say it takes, as you say, experience and time and everything else, actually some of them are now starting with some of the stuff we've only just learnt already.
That's interesting.
So,
just fascinating. I feel like we should extend these conversations for a couple of hours, but I have to move it on because I just want to throw some. So we're going to, we talked about just.
Your questions. That's right. Yes.
Some questions at you, and I've got a little list. So
that's good.
I do this randomly, but I do have a list because I haven't done one of these for a while.
That's good.
So where do I go first? I haven't done this for a while, and I'm going to go with Joe. What are we doing here?
Oh, deep. Well, it feels like a therapy session for me. I don't know about you. I think we are building a much stronger relationship in a very short space of time because of the conversation that we've had. Bearing in mind we've not met and this is our first ever conversation.
Amazing. Okay. Joe, do you know who you are?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want an elaboration? No.
My supplementary question is, who are you, Joe?
Okay, so I am somebody who has gone through all of those things I've talked about and hopefully learnt from a lot of those things. I'm somebody who's very enthusiastic and helpful to people, who wants to nurture my mini-me to not have some of those issues that I had. And my current topic around that is, how do you maintain the self-esteem and resilience that a 12-year-old has when they have them? And not all of them have them, but I'm really lucky that my daughter does have it. How do you maintain that through the next 4, 5, 6, 7 years?
Love it. That's important. I love that. Okay, I've got a few fill in the blanks or complete the sentence.
Okay.
So pressure comes from?
Believing that you can't do something about resolving whatever that thing is, which is why I don't have so much of it, because I think you can change how you think about all these things and take away that pressure.
I love that. If I could, I would
move to France and be fluent in speaking it. I'm trying.
Success is
not feeling that pressure and doing the things that you want to do, and doing more of the things you want to do and less of the things that you feel you should do or you need to do.
I love that. That's really good. In the end, it all comes down to
friends and family.
I love that. Very lovely. Very lovely. So I don't tell many people this because it's a bit of a secret, but apart from being an unpublished writer and a bit of a poet, I build small time machines, one-use time machines, and I've got one for you. I'm going to let you have it and it only lasts a minute. And I'm going to send you back to Joe Wild at about whenever the time that you want to pick. And you don't have to share it, but I'd love to know what you're going to say to her in that little minute. If you've got something to say to her, what would you say to her, Joe?
I'd say that you're way better than you think you are, and one day that will sort of start to permeate.
Wow, that's so cool. I love that. Yeah. And I always say this because I'm a bit weird, but in my strange Wizard of Oz brain, I'm quite logical sometimes, but in my strange Wizard of Oz brain, and borrowing heavily from something called quantum physics, I believe that because you've said that, that's happened.
Good. I think it has.
Okay, I completely forgot to do something. I can't believe that I wrote my note about asking this. So I do this thing where I'm supposed to ask, this is something I made up, obviously, because it's my project. So I made this thing up where I would ask people to talk about a song and tell me a story about a song that's meaningful to them at the beginning of the interview. Now, I haven't done that, but so I'm going to just spring that on you now. A meaningful piece of music that you can tell me a very quick story about and why it's meaningful to you. What springs to mind?
The one that comes straight to mind, I think I mentioned it on somebody else's podcast when they asked about music. Randomly, there was a song at the end of the 70s that I absolutely adored. Every time I ever heard it on the radio, I loved it, but I never knew what it was. And when I met my husband, my first husband, he was very into his music. And at some stage during our 13 years of being together, he, or however long, that doesn't sound right, but anyway, whatever it was, 10 years maybe, I heard the song being played on the radio. And I was like, what's that called? What is that song? And so I found out what it was. And then I sort of forgot about it for ages. And then now we've got, access to music at our fingertips.
Yeah.
I now have it on my playlist on Amazon. And it's, do you want to know what it is?
I do. Yeah, I really do.
It's Forever Autumn, which is Justin Hayward. And it was from War of the Worlds, wasn't it? But I never knew any of that, and I didn't even know what it was called all those years ago. But for some reason, I just loved it. But I now have the version that comes from the War of the Worlds. Is it Richard Burton or no? Or was it the other one? Is it Richard Burton?
I think it was
another Welsh person, wasn't it, in the same village that might have been, but it wasn't. I think it was Richard Burton.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah. So the bit where it's interspersed with him talking about,
wow,
trying to.
Okay. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so you know what? You've just been awesome. This is fantastic to talk to you. I've just got one more question. Jo Dodds, is there anything else?
You do ask deep questions, don't you? I always want to answer a question with a question. I want to say, what, now or in the future or when we die?
I'm not going to give you any help.
No, I know you're not going to, are you? There is always, I'm always learning. I always want to move forward. So there has to be, otherwise what's the point?
I love that. That's a fantastic way to finish it. Brilliant. You know what? This is amazing because people are just so amazing. Like we've never met. We've exchanged a few kind of likes on Facebook, and here you are telling me your story, which is just amazingly generous of you, but it's fantastic to listen to you as well because you speak so fluently about everything. I just can just thank you for doing this. I appreciate it, and it's it's just lovely to do it, and from nothing comes this, and this is what it's all about. So
well, thank you for inviting me. I've really enjoyed it. I'll apologise for any beeping that's been going on. I have a new laptop, as you know, and I haven't worked out how to switch off all the notifications, clearly. I have really enjoyed it. I'm now off to tell Judith that I've been able to spend an hour looking at Handsome Frank, so that's that'll be in my gratitude tomorrow, just to annoy her.
The funny thing is, I did one with Judith like a year ago, and we did it. She doesn't like doing videos, so we did an audio. Yeah. It was brilliant. It was so she's so fantastic.
She is.
I then lost it.
Oh no!
I know. I was really gutted, and
that's like Ken's teeth. I wanted to be on my podcast, and she still hasn't come on it.
I was so annoyed with myself because.
But then you got rid of Kerry's as well.
Yeah, no, I did. I got rid of. I think I got rid of 3, and 2 of them. One of them, was a shame, but it wasn't really a problem. But Kerry's one, I was really upset because they were both awesome. They were. Yes,
I can imagine.
Because they're so amazing, But hi Judith, sorry.
I'm sure she'll forgive you if you do an audio one again, though. But it's been brilliant. It's lovely, and we really must meet. And obviously, I'm going to meet Kerry now as well. So that's
good luck with that.
Step in the right direction.
And you guys would probably be awesome, whatever you decide to do. So, but thank you once again, Jo. I really appreciate you coming on, and just good luck with everything. And,
thank you, and you. Yeah, good luck with the podcast. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. All the best. Take care.